So, hello. First of all, my name's Adam. I'm part of the Glasgow outreach team for the Fast Stream, as is Faith, who's one of our panelists. So you're getting to meet a couple of us today. And this event is on being from a low socioeconomic background in the Fast Stream and civil service more generally. The goal of it is to answer your questions, assuage any concerns you might have, give you a little bit of an idea of what it's like, what experiences you might have being from a lower socioeconomic background, or what some people might traditionally call a working class background. It's one of those things that the civil service, in its inclusivity, sometimes obscures a little bit what it means, but essentially it means from a working class background. And yeah, the goal is to really encourage you to consider a career in the civil service, consider applying for the Fast Stream, even if you are from a lower socioeconomic background. Particularly, actually, if you are from a lower socioeconomic background, we'd be delighted to have you, and we'd really encourage you to apply, or to consider it at least, consider the possibility. A couple of practical things before we kick off. I don't know how many of you have been on a webinar before, but essentially the functionality is you can see us, but we can't see you. So great as it would be to have some sort of direct engagement, unfortunately we're not able to do that. The best way to engage is through the Q&A function and the chat function at the bottom. The session is going to be structured that we're going to hear from our two speakers who are going to talk a little bit about their background and about their experiences, and then we'll open it up to your questions. So please feel free throughout to just pop your questions in that Q&A box, and we'll kind of answer them after our panelists have finished giving their sort of opening remarks. It's also being recorded, so your fellow students and others in the future who can't make it perhaps today will be able to watch the recording back. So if don't put anything in the Q&A box or the chat that you wouldn't want the entirety of the Glasgow student body to see. And I think that's everything from me on the practical side. So I'll just introduce our speakers very briefly. I won't steal their thunder too much. I'll let them introduce themselves on their own terms. But just to sort of say hello and thank you for your time to Nicola Smith, who is a senior civil servant at the department. Well, it's not a department, is it? It's an office, the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office. And is very busy, obviously, in a very busy day job. So we really appreciate Nicola giving up her time today. So hi, Nicola. And then we also have Faith Olagbegi, who is one of my colleagues, as I said, in the Glasgow outreach team, and is a current Fast Streamer. Nicola was a Fast Streamer and is now a senior civil servant, and Faith is a current Fast Streamer. So hopefully we can give you some really interesting perspectives on what it's been like for them. So Nicola, if you don't mind kicking off and just telling us a little bit about your experiences first, that'd be great.
Sure. So I've been part of the Cabinet Office University Outreach for a couple of years now. So I'm used to doing these type of events. But I have to admit, this is the one that I've been looking forward to slightly dispel some myths, actually, because I know there's a bit of a stereotype about the civil service, whether it's white men in bowler hats and Whitehall, which is where all the policy wonks and government work. But to go a bit of background, because so I grew up in Scotland. I grew up initially in Edinburgh, in a block of high-rise flats called Sight Hill that basically got demolished. I think because they were like uninhabitable by the end in the 80s. And moved out to West Lothian, where I went to a local comprehensive school called West Calder High School. Which I loved, actually, because it was like going out to the countryside at that point, So I grew up, went to school there, did a lot of outdoor stuff, which was amazing, because for me it was, without getting into it, had a bit of a disruptive childhood. Dad was an alcoholic, mum worked part-time, which was tricky. I'm not going to deny that. And for me, I think education was the way out of that environment. So I took, which was unheard of, I was the first in my family to go to university. And I not only did I go to university, I did like the middle class route. I took a gap year. I went to the other side of the world, you know, to Australia to get as far away from my childhood, I would say. And then I came back and went to like a Russell Group university, like again, a bit unheard of. So I studied at Edinburgh and did psychology because I thought, why not? I wasn't getting any tutor support, just picked any old subject. But it was great fun. Like, I love university. Edinburgh was full of a lot of posh folk though. And for me, this was like the first sort of occasion when I was like, oh, I'm a bit different actually. And I used to joke, you know, that I got into Edinburgh because they were letting some local quota of local students in or something like that. Because I did feel like a fish out of water. But for me, I had the travel bug. So after traveling around the world during my gap year, when I left university, I decided to go again the other side of the world. I taught English in Japan for 2 years and then came back, got a temp job because I hadn't a clue what I was doing, and again in Livingston, which was great fun, not. And then decided to do charity work in South America. So went off, I had no money, by the way. I was doing this like backpacking with no money. Came back, and then thankfully one of my university friends who picked a lot more of a sensible career in accountancy was living in London. So I went and crashed at her place whilst I was looking for a job. And for me, I ended up getting a job in the British Council, which is like this organisation that works around the globe. And then eventually, after 3 attempts, I joined the fast stream on the generalist fast stream. And I worked in tax, I worked in the Cabinet Office, I worked on the Olympics. And for almost the last 10 years, I've been working in the international space and international development. I'm going to say, look, the civil service is huge. It's based around the whole UK. So you're going to go to places where you'll meet people exactly like you, like whether it's offices up in Scotland. But if you go to work in Whitehall, central London, you will come up against your sort of a real mixture of people, very, very bright people, privately educated, bright people. And it's going to take a lot of getting used to in terms of, I know I had to work really hard to get my grammar and written skills up to scratch for when I started writing policy briefing. When I'm verbally updating ministers and stuff like that, I've had executive voice coaching to calm my nerves, like in terms of confidence building. And I guarantee, like, they wouldn't have given that to anyone. I'm really privileged to have that. So I could talk all day about this subject. It's very, very important to me because we need a lot of diversity in the civil service. And so I'll stop there because I do want to come back to this, but that's an overview of my career. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicola. Faith, would you like to talk a little bit about your experiences?
Sure, definitely. It was nice hearing your story, Nicola. I feel like there's many ways that we resonate, so you may be able to get that. So I come from a single parent household. I live with my mom, still live with my mom, enjoying the benefits here. So when I was in sixth form, I essentially had to provide for myself. So I had to work part-time jobs. So I was able to afford my dinner money, buy myself clothes. So it's something I've always had to be kind of a provider for myself. Also have siblings as well, so kind of supporting them here and there. I would say, so yeah, it's been a very, very interesting journey for me because I never honestly expected to be where I am today. I remember when it came to the point when I was in my A-levels and I saw my results and I was kind of like, I had to go back into the to people who gave the results, and I was like, is this actually my grade? I actually got an A in economics. Like, this doesn't make sense. Just because I also saw education as a route out of, you know, the situation that I was in. Not to say that I'm not thankful. My mom's, you know, definitely an amazing person, but of course she was quite limited, you know, working in the post office and only earning a certain amount to care for myself and 3 siblings. I ended up getting into my first choice in university. So I went to Aston University. I studied politics. As you can see, I was very, very keen on getting into the civil service. So I did like a variety of internships, including the summer diversity internship program, which definitely recommend if you guys aren't in final years, just to get yourself a foot in the door. And I also used that as a fast pass for me to be able to get into the civil service as well. So essentially with fast pass, you basically, you've done this already in the SDIT, but you go straight into the application stage. Going back into my university experience, I also did a placement year as part of my degree. So I worked in the government relations. I didn't want to work in the private sector. I quickly realized that I do like my life. So I guess working in the civil service definitely offers more of a work-life balance in comparison to the private sector. I also, I saw that you mentioned Livingston as part of your travel experience. I took part in an experience called ICS. So I was working as a business consultant in Zambia for 3 months. So I'm sure you probably got the chance to visit the Victoria Falls while you were in Livingston as well, which is beautiful if you ever have the chance to ever go out there. But yeah, similarly, I didn't have the money. I remember my mum looked at me like I was crazy. Like, I was like, yeah, I want to go to Zambia. I have to raise £800. She was like, I don't know how you're going to do it. I don't know how I did it. I just kind of like, I've always just tried to find ways to make things possible for myself. So I had like many fundraisers and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm glad for the people who supported me. I also did a cultural exchange in China as well. But yeah, going to the point in working in London, in Whitehall. So both my postings, I worked in the Ministry of Justice and I've also worked in the Department of International, well, I'm currently in the Department of International Trade. Definitely coming in, you see a lot of people, as described previously, coming from educated backgrounds. But what I would say is I'm really thankful to be in the space that I am in now, because I feel like there's different skills that I can learn from different people in terms of confidence, how they articulate themselves when it comes to applications. So say, for instance, if I am to write applications, they're like friends who've gone to universities such as King's, LSE, Oxford, Cambridge, you know, I can ask them for advice, tips, and just learn where they get the confidence from. So I feel like it's definitely been beneficial to myself. I'll keep it short there, but if you do have any questions for myself, I'm happy to answer.
Thanks very much, Faith. We've got one question coming. Essentially, have you ever felt that your working classness was being discouraged, or people were trying to sort of eradicate it out of you? Coming from a rough background, it's an important aspect of sort of identity. And you know, is there any effort to sort of suppress it and mold you, I guess, into a stereotypical civil servant? Have you experienced that at all, Faith? And then we'll go to Nicola after.
No. And I remember in my previous team, one of the DDs, deputy directors, asked me, you know, why you know, how is it so easy for you to be your authentic self? And I feel like it's so important to be your authentic self no matter where you are, because there's something that you can bring. For instance, when it came to the issues with Black Lives Matter, I was very vocal about my thoughts and my opinion. I didn't feel like I should suppress how I feel and the potential changes that needed to be made. So I feel like it's so important because there's something that you can bring that's different. Even when it comes to policy making and so on, I feel like there's so much that you can bring that maybe you might educate somebody on. So for instance, there was a policy area that I was working on in my previous role, and one of my colleagues mentioned, you know, I do not see any other person other than white people in this conference. We need to make this more diverse. For somebody who is in that kind of scene, they might say, you know, I'm comfortable, this is my likable, you know, people who I know, people within my network, but being able to make statements and comments like that is something that can definitely feed into the policy making process. So because of that, you know, now we have a variety of stakeholders from different backgrounds and communities. And I feel it's important when it comes to policy making that you involve as many people as possible so that policies are created accurately.
Can I build on that? Although I recognise there's a question, because I've just kind of, and I'll come on to the question that was asked about the last session. So what was interesting when I talked about that executive coaching I've had, I don't think it was about, you know, it wasn't about eradicating my accent or anything like that. It was very much that confidence building. And what I'm acutely aware of is maybe because I'm aware of my background, like, and how occasionally in the past, I would say it's less so now, I've maybe not come across as confident in relation to my peers. So I've had to work at that. I genuinely believe that, and I'm very authentic in my background, I've been very open here, and I've been very open across my department about my background. I've written blogs, I've done vlogs that have gone out across the whole national security, architecture and government, talking about my experiences. And going back, actually talking about being an out gay woman and my background. I talked about intersectionality a little bit in the last session. It hasn't affected me personally. Weirdly, I do think there's, because I'm probably quite openly gay, quite sort of masculine or centre, and I'll sort of refer to myself in those terms, it's probably benefited me a little bit. As opposed to maybe other things, but I think there's a real recognition, actually. It's about, and I've noticed it the last year, whether it's resilience or adaptability, it's like looking at your background and thinking, how has this made me who I am? And for me, resilience over the last year, the pandemic, when I've got a little voice in my head, when I've got to do big events or anything that's a bit nerve-wracking, and I think, well, I go back to a time and I think, well, I lived through that, I can do this, it's not a problem. And it gives you a sense of perspective. And actually, that's where I get a lot of my inner strength from, by thinking, well, if I'm able to get through that crap, I can actually, this is a breeze. So, and I find that stands wonders. Faith, I was talking about the Livingston up in Scotland, but I have been to the one in Zambia, but it's all right.
Great, thank you both. Yeah, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about sort of speaking publicly and any tips that you have for sort of being confident, because I think the fast stream and the civil service application process involves a lot of speaking and presenting and putting yourself out there and putting yourself across, and which, if you're from a working class background, if you've got a certain accent, if you don't speak in a certain way, people often find that difficult. And have you got any tips or anything further you'd like to share on that, on sort of being confident in speaking and authentically?
Yeah, like, so I did a whole series of one-to-one tuition with a voice coach from the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. I love the civil service, that they pay you to do this when you're a senior civil servant. So the main thing is preparation. But what I quite liked about it, my voice coach was like, really big up your accent, you know. whether it's because it was the slight Scottishness and enunciation and so on. But the other top tip for anyone that does any sports or anything like, or yoga, it's the breathing. So make sure you're breathing relaxed in the space. Physically help yourself with relaxing using diaphragm breathing. So, and I've done huge events. I've done TV. Accidentally ended up in Russian TV when I was traveling in Central Asia. I've done various podcasts. I've done big UN type events. And for me, it comes down to preparation, knowing what I'm going to say, and practice, and breathing, and knowing your audience. And then, yeah, and even with ministers, look, yes, some ministers can be very, how can I say, very thorough. I'm recognizing this is being recorded, so I've got to be careful what I say sometimes. And it's been knowing your stuff a little bit and confidence in yourself when you're in that environment with ministers, including prime ministers. In one of my roles, I was briefing the prime minister. So it's just knowing your stuff really, or knowing when you don't know as well. So not trying to blag it because they'll see right through it. And I think it takes time. Like, I feel really confident now that, and I think being authentic in who you are, that gets you so, that's the biggest tip that I could probably give you. Because if you're trying to be someone you're not, it's going to come through. And occasionally, yeah, you'll get the daft questions about people asking about your background and where you're from and which school you went to. I'm like, crying out loud, why are you asking me which school I went to? Be like, yeah, just being honest, and be like, and at the end of the day, sometimes they're just trying to find a connection with you. So I don't know, football's always a good fallback. Or rugby, depending on their background.
Thanks, Nicola. Faith, have you got anything you'd like to add to that on sort of speaking confidently and authentically?
Yeah, so I think, Nicola definitely covered a lot of things. Being your authentic self. And if anyone does ask any questions about your background, just ignore it. Because sometimes people are just being ignorant. Just remember that you have been selected in that job for a reason, and just keep that confidence because someone saw something in you, so just prove them right. Yeah, you have the brains. It's not about how you speak or where you come from. There's a skill that you have, and that's the most important thing. So just remember that you have the skills to be there, and do your thing. You'll smash it.
I think that's very good advice, Faith. I mean, a thing from me on speaking and accents and things like that is I've encountered this, and I'm not from a lower socioeconomic background. I'm just from the north, but I have had to explain to people more than once that fact, and particularly at university and not in the civil service as such, but it is something you do encounter, and you do encounter people sort of. I think it is often quite innocent. Sort of saying, "Oh, you've got an accent. Where are you from?" And trying to get a sort of way in, as Nicola says. They're trying to start a conversation and see what shared experiences you have. And I think you have to sort of brace yourself for that a little bit. And that is going to happen. In an ideal world, it might not, and it might knock you back a little bit for a second, but it might well happen. So yeah, just that's some really good advice for me as well, actually, there on speaking confidently and authentically. We've got another question in regards to the coaching and resistance. Oh, sorry, we've had that one. Oh no, we've had those. Great. Any other questions? Please do pop them in the chat.
There's one, Adam, about when you're engaging with someone. I used a very civil service word. They're engaging. It's very Star Trek. When you're meeting with people from a different class background, how do you overcome it? if you just can't relate. I think that's what the question was around. And so I work in the Foreign Office, or the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office. Excuse me, my neighbours are drilling next door. Benefits of working at home at the moment. And the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office has probably, given that you've got my colleagues who are sending their kids to boarding school and things like that, which is paid for. So it's a very different life, and particularly if you're living overseas, you know, often you've got people that, you've got a gardener, you've got people that cook for you occasionally, depending on where you are. So it really brings to the fore. I know also, I think working at home, what it's really highlights are the colleagues, you know, that have got their own working home office down the end of their farmlands, and then you've got other colleagues who are working from their bed and stuff. So it's really highlighted that difference. I think the civil service, though, what I will say is very inclusive, that actually my colleagues where there is that disparity, they recognise it, and they do try to bring in colleagues that maybe aren't in that privileged background or position that have that space. So allowing, for example, people, if they want to come into the office to work and so on. So there's a big mixture, and I do think it's, there has been occasions, don't get me wrong, when I've been asked, like, the questions, which school do you go to? Or the other one is, which part of Edinburgh are you from? Because when you ask someone that, they're fishing, basically. They want to know if you're Morningside, or which is the posh bit for those who don't know Edinburgh well. And I'm like, no, it's not Morningside, not the posh bit at all. The dodgy bit, you know, the really dodgy bit. And you can, for me, like, I'm not trying to be self-deprecating, because sometimes self-deprecation is a way to sort of kick yourself. Sometimes it's like, no, actually, I went here. And if they don't want to, like, pick up further than that, you don't need to continue the conversation. In all my experience, the majority encounter is trying to find that common ground. There has been a couple of idiots that I just wanted, I don't know if it's an inferiority complex or something, like they're on a bit of a power trip. But it helps actually, that I've had a very accelerated career, and with that comes one thing about the civil service that can be a bit hierarchical. Because I'm in quite a senior position now, and I don't tend to encounter that. And if I did, I'd be more curious about why they're asking silly questions like that, and what it tells me about them than what it tells me about me, because I'm pretty confident in who I am. But it was an interesting question, Faith. I don't know if you wanted to, when there's been such a huge disparity between you and your colleagues and background.
Honestly, my aim is just to get the work done, if I'm honest with you. So if there's people who I don't, for whatever reason, get along with, I just talk to them on a need-to-need basis. I don't have to be friends with them. At the end of the day, I have friends, so it's not like, and like you stated before, I'm also confident within myself. I just try and be polite to them, be nice, say hey, good morning. But there's no need to be friends with people if there's no common ground. It's like when you go to university, you're not going to be friends with everybody, unfortunately. You're going to have a selective few of friends. And as you get older, you might just only have friends on your hands. So it's okay if you're not friends with everyone, just as long as you're nice, you come with good manners. That's the most important, and you'll be able to get the work done. And if anybody decides to be an idiot, then you just say ignore them, and if necessary, report them, because it says more about them than it does about yourself.
Thanks both. That was really insightful. We've got a really interesting question here. Would you say that working from home has actually helped your colleagues understand each other's personal circumstances a bit better and helped to mitigate some of those class barriers, and I suppose other barriers as well? I don't know if anyone wants to go first on that.
I'd say yes and no. I think in the occasions that I was describing, in terms of, often it might not just be the class thing, it might be where you are in your career. Look, I'm very lucky, as I said, I earn a decent salary, so I'm in a very fortunate position, whereas people maybe starting out, particularly if they live in London. London's an expensive place to live, where you're maybe renting. It's highlighted that gap, so it's, as someone, like, I oversee over 50 staff, and knowing the circumstances of them and being able to help them if I can, like, great thing about the civil service, we've paid for monitors, you know, like I'm wearing I'm sat on an ergonomic chair, you know, that my work paid for. So it's things like that help, you know, and trying to, if you can, support it. The flip side, though, working from home, what it has exacerbated, and a lot of it in the media, or I think the switch when you're having to then homeschool. So my colleagues with children who are having to balance that, whether it's not just the mums, but it's also the dads, whoever's looking after their kids, I've really noticed that. And I found that quite interesting in terms of gender dynamics a little bit. And making sure that we accommodate that. So if they're blocking out meetings at particular times. The other thing is tricky. What I've found, I'm quite a sociable person, not playing to the stereotype of being Scottish or anything. I miss the social interaction, the formal interaction that you would have at work with a whole range of different people. And I work with I work with military type, I work with like range, like everyone. And I'm having to actively build that into my my diary, and I just miss those impromptu discussions, because often they're quite the creative ones. And if I'm being honest, they're the ones that can also help your career. Just having a discussion about opportunities that are coming up. And I'll be interesting how that affects like homework and it impacts on that, which is quite key if you're coming from maybe, like, it doesn't need to be a class background, but I think knowing those connections, networks help.
Thanks, Nicola. Faith, have you got any thoughts on that question?
I would say it does highlight people's classes. So say for instance, my mum works nights and I have a little brother, so I had to homeschool while working, and I feel like there's other colleagues that I was speaking to who were in a similar circumstance to me, whereas, you know, some people had the situation where they were like homeschooling and sharing it amongst, you know, their partners. So I feel like it does. However, me saying that, I feel like work is definitely accommodating, for instance, the meeting times, agreeing slots, where and when I could work and so on, and be able to facilitate the work with my brother as well, and if necessary, reducing my workload as well, so that I'm able to handle the pressure of dealing with both, because I'm telling you, homeschooling is not easy. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say on that question. Work is accommodating for whatever circumstances is going in your life. Even I have one of my people that I line manage is a carer, and of course I'm very, very accommodating. I know sometimes he has to take his mum to doctor's appointments. So just being nice and caring in that sense, I feel it's a lot more human than roles in the private sector.
Definitely.
Sorry, I'm going to use my slight privileged position of being a panelist to ask a question. So when I talk to other colleagues who are maybe from, to use the PC, lower socioeconomic background, one of the things that strikes me often is I feel like they work really hard. They always give like 100%. And I don't know if it's because of the pressure to always be like that pressure they put on themselves. I don't know, Faith, do you feel, I'm not asking you directly, but whether you think that's a fair reflection.
Yes, and I feel like my personal reason is just because I've been geared like that my whole life. As you mentioned in the beginning, education was your route out. And if you're seeing education as your route out, you're trying to grind and get as much done as much as you possibly can. It's not like I have mum and dad to rely on, unfortunately. So I've definitely had to ensure that I've worked hard to get to where I am. And I feel like I've definitely kept that culture because I know that I still have myself to rely on. So just proving myself and making sure that I'm able to get to the places that I want to be, and also being a good example for my siblings as well. I think it's very important that they can also do very, very well despite what background they come from.
That's really interesting. So there's I'm already thinking about, like, in terms of recruitment, you want the people that whether it's tenacity or resilience, that I think is absolutely key.
Definitely. I mean, from my perspective as well, I certainly gained more of an appreciation for my colleagues' personal circumstances in all of this. And you realise, and I think if we'd been working in the office, I might not have realised that a lot of my colleagues are parents and carers, and are suffering with, like, a couple of my colleagues have long COVID and all these sorts of things, and other disabilities and reasonable adjustments. And it's made me certainly a lot more conscious of when I'm arranging meetings, how I'm communicating with them, whether it's better perhaps to send them an email that they can look at when they get a chance, rather than to try and call them when it's convenient for me, and little things like that. And so I've certainly adjusted how I communicate with colleagues and how I interact with colleagues since working from home. One question that I was thinking about, Faith, because you mentioned not having sort of mum and dad to help you out financially, but that made me sort of think in terms of mentoring and things like that for people from working class backgrounds who might not necessarily have that family friend who's a senior civil servant or whatever, or parents who can nudge them in the right direction here and there. Is there any sort of mentoring going on, any sort of networks that you found useful in the civil service or elsewhere that have kind of helped make up for that lack of maybe connections and networking that you might have if your parents were from a certain background or had certain friends?
Yeah, so for one, joining the STIP was definitely really helpful. For me, getting onto the STIP, there was this company called Lower Recruitment that helped me with the application process, which was really, really useful. I'll also say once I got into the civil service through the SDIP, I made sure I kept in contact with everybody that I knew. So whether it was while I was in uni, going out for lunches, telling them about how I'm going, I feel like definitely when they say your network is your net worth, 100%, because those are the people who help you to get to where you need to go. And they just have the knowledge and the skills that you don't have. So getting to know as many people as you can, going to as many events as you possibly can, getting email contacts, being annoying, messaging people on LinkedIn, however you do it, because those are the people that will help you to get into the next stepping stone, because you unfortunately can't do it on your own.
Thanks, Faith. That's really, really useful to know. Nicola, have you got any thoughts on kind of networking, mentoring?
Yeah, so networking is so important. I absolutely agree. Whether it's opportunities, hearing word of mouth, what's coming up, or in my case, so I've used it at various points. I've used the formal. Even recently, I'm about to change jobs, and I drew on an executive coach to help me with changing jobs, actually, because it was going to be a big change for me. And I've had different mentors at different points throughout my career. Like my mentor currently is a very, very experienced ambassador who has been brilliant at looking over things like job applications, who knows me, who knows I've got a tendency to sort of downplay what I do. So bringing that out a little bit. And then just the peer groups, absolutely. For me, I flip it as well. I think I actively, like, I spend a lot of my time coaching people and mentoring people, because I think it's really important that people, particularly I think those from maybe marginalised groups, whether it's, you know, LGBT plus, I'm also the senior Black and sort of like minority ethnic champion, you know, so I think there's a whole different ways. For me, it's really important to give back, for recognizing not everyone's had maybe some of them. I'm not like all the sport, you know, whether it's, and it starts at an early age. It so starts young, like, you know, like I look at my niece and nephew now, and they get tutoring, like they get that support to get them into university, then the groups. The other thing I've noticed recently, and this is a huge step forward for the civil service, there's increasingly socio-economic diversity and inclusion groups. And the one within the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office is brilliant. It's really focusing on that building confidence and the public speaking, because that's the bit that, if anything, like, it's not about changing like who you are, it's becoming more confident in who you are to express it. And they're doing a huge amount of that. And initiatives like Toastmasters, this is something that is really common around the globe, you know, setting up informal groups where you practice speech giving and giving toasts. It's great stuff like that. It just gives you so much confidence. And I think that type of thing, like, or debating societies, I know I wouldn't say it's a regret, but looking back, I kind of wish at university I joined a debating society, because it just helps you, particularly if I'd known I was going into the civil service, how to craft an argument, I think lots of different things like that. And there's just so much support out there if you need it. And I think keeping your networks going, I think, Faith, you probably do a much better job than I do at keeping my networks up. I spend too much time relying on like just doing a great job at the day job that I sometimes forget I've got to do that networking side.
I feel like,
yeah,
I feel like given COVID, I've definitely reduced my networking stuff. Just because, like you mentioned before, it's difficult having those conversations with people. But yeah.
Yeah, and just to plug, there is a really good fast stream network called the Opportunities Network that is all about people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and making sure that they start building these connections at the start of their careers. And I've attended a few of the events and they've been really good, so that there is that support network there. We've got 1 or 2 minutes left if anyone's got any last minute questions, or if either of our panelists want to add anything particularly urgently. If not, I'm just going to pop up on the screen some further information. So there's some information here that's just a bit more about the fast stream in general, and you can sign up at that email address, fast stream pre-register, to get a notification for when the fast stream opens, and particularly relevant to this group, when other aspects of the fast stream open, not just the main one. So there are internships as well. Faith mentioned the summer diversity internship program, and there are 2 different internships, so do look into those. They're aimed at different marginalised groups, but if you're from a lower socioeconomic background, that is one of the groups that sort of qualifies you to apply. So do look into those. And if we haven't had a chance to get to your question, you can email us there at that email address, scotlandoutreach@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you with answers. And finally, there is a QR code on there, which is just a quick survey about how you found the session, and it'll be really helpful to us when we're putting on future sessions similar to this to know, how useful it was and where we can improve and things like that. So thank you very, very much to both our panelists. I think that's been a really, really insightful and I hope really helpful for you all listening session. So thank you both for giving up your time, and thank you to everyone for attending and asking your questions. And yeah, consider applying for the fast stream and becoming a civil servant. Join us. Thanks, everyone.